Okay, friends, boys, girls, my non-binary friends, um, we are into Flexbox, which I'll show you here in a second. I actually want to show you what I did to my site, kind of using some of the stuff we've learned so far. I also wanted to give you a heads up. If you see me kind of looking down here a whole bunch, it's because I've recorded this video 3 times now, and each time the recording is messed up, and I didn't realize it till the end. So we're gonna try this one more time, and yeah, it's fun times. So let's go ahead. You can see that I added a bunch of padding here to my header element. Kind of give it some space, make sure things were right up against the edge. And I also used the property text align center, and that took care of my text and my image. I centered them both, so I have something that looks a lot nicer now than just kind of everything crammed up against the side there. The rest of it is pretty much the way we left it. A little bit of spacing on a few things just to kind of keep things looking nice and not up against each other, but nothing too fancy there. It's starting to look more like what we would want a website to look like. It's not quite there yet. I'm not happy with it, but we're getting there. One thing that's really bothering me, and something you may have noticed on your own site, is this little border right here. You see this? I really want this dark green to go all the way to the edge, but I've got this tan sticking out. Well, let's take a look at why. If we go ahead and inspect, this is a great tool for figuring out why things are doing. So remember, we can highlight over this, and we see colors pop up. The blue is our content, orange is margin, and then like here you can see that green band around, that's padding. So if we hover around to the body tag, you can see we've got this orange, and if you look at the little box model preview down here, you can see we've got 8 pixels of margin going all the way around it. I think Shelby probably went over with you that a lot of HTML elements come with styling already out of there. Lists are a great example, right? We didn't add any styling here to get these bullets and everything, right? The browser just knows what to do with that. Well, the one thing it does with the body tag is it assumes that you want some distance between the edge of the screen and your actual website, which we do, except for we want to customize that a little bit. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. So I'm going to go all the way up here to my body tag, and I got an empty slot right here. All I'm going to do is say margin 0. And then when I come back here and it reloads, you can see I've got that all the way to the edge, and I just feel like that looks a lot cleaner, personally, and it looks a lot nicer. It's a really common thing on a lot of websites to have this sort of hero section here, is what we call it. But I thought you guys might enjoy taking a look at that. So, getting into Flexbox. What Flexbox is it's really a nickname for Flexible Box Layout Module. And it's kind of a clunky term, but it is pretty descriptive, right? It creates flexible boxes. We talk about HTML elements being just like boxes, right? And we can kind of stretch them a little bit, but they kind of sit next to each other or on top of each other like boxes. What Flexbox does is it lets us make flexible and responsive layout structures a lot more easily. And what that means is things can kind of shift and change size depending on the width of your screen. And that's what kind of responsive is. It responds to the width of the screen. It just makes all of that a lot easier without getting into positions and floats, which were kind of the old school way that we used to do things. It's still a perfectly valid CSS rule stuff, but for making layouts on a website, Flexbox is a lot easier. In fact, there's another CSS set of things is called CSS Grid, which makes it super easy. But we're gonna stick just Flexbox today. But before we had this, some things were very difficult. Most notably, vertically centering a block of content inside its parent. So if I have this box here, right, and I want to put something right in the middle vertically, kind of before Flexbox, that was hard. And there were a few tricks that you could use, but sometimes they didn't work reliably based on what was around them, and it caused more issues than I would have liked for it to. The next two ones are kind of the same thing. So imagine if I have 3 boxes, right? And they all have different amounts of content. They're all going to be different heights. Does that make sense? So this one might be really tall, this one's going to be here, and this one's like really small. But I want them all to be the same height, right? with, say, a colored background. So I've got 3 little cards or something. Before Flexbox, I either had to set a hard height on them, so I had to say specifically this is going to be 200 pixels, and then it didn't matter how much content was in it. If it was too little, there'd be a lot of extra space. If there was too much, this content would start to push out of the bottom of it, and it would look terrible. Or I'd use JavaScript to measure all of the boxes, find the tallest one, calculate the height that it had to apply to the rest of them, and then change the size. And it's about as much fun as it sounded. It didn't work real well all the time, and you could see that happening when you loaded a page. You could see boxes popping around the screen as they changed size, and it just wasn't the best at all. And what we're going to be doing today is a simple main content sidebar layout. So you'll see often there's like a main article and then a sidebar on the side that has maybe, most recent posts, or, sign up for my newsletter or whatever. It's a very common layout. We're going to try putting that on our site today. But before we do that, let's find out one of the small differences about Flexbox. Most of the rules we've done up to this point have really only affected the element we're targeting. So if I say I write a rule that says P color blue, right? Our paragraphs, we want the text to be blue. Or if I say this ID header has 20 pixels of padding, then only that ID header is going to have 20 pixels of padding. The difference with Flexbox is that it applies to both the container, and really it affects its children the most. So we'll kind of get into what that means, and you'll see it in action. But just know that it's not just what you're targeting; you're affecting other things as well. So here's kind of where we start here. Display flex. This is our container. It's just going to define. It's going to say, hey, this is a flex container. Okay. And it kind of turns on that flex property for all of the children, so that we can start tweaking things and getting them the way we want. And then our items, we're going to use a rule that looks like this. Flex 0, 1, 50%, and we can change that percentage however we like. But let's look at this shorthand for a second. Well, to start with, I want to show you something. You may have noticed that this is not valid CSS. You can't put a class inside of a class like that. I think we did it just to illustrate that, hey, these items are inside the item container. When you write this, you'd really want it down here. So I would take all of this and put it underneath my item container rule. There's some other tools that we can do to make things look more like this, but we're not going to get into that during Bitstream Academy this time. But we have a shorthand here again. So this stands for, these 3 numbers are flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. So how much can I grow? How much should I shrink? And what is kind of my basis for size? The second and third ones you see here, this 1 and the 50%, they're optional. You don't have to define them. If you leave all off, the default is just 0, 1 auto, so that your browser will figure it out for you. But sometimes we want to get a little bit more specific with that. There are a lot of Flexbox properties, and you can find them all here. All right, so let's click on this link. This is you can see where I got them open because I recorded this already, or I thought I did. We'll let this load up. This is CSS Tricks. It's a CSS blog site, and it has tons of articles that are just super helpful. If I'm trying to look something up on how to do a CSS thing that I forgot, or I'm having trouble with, or I've never done before, if I see a CSS Tricks article, that's one of the first places I go. And this is the complete guide to Flexbox, and they keep this. You notice this says June 12, 2020. I think this article is, I don't know how many years old, and they keep updating it so it stays up to date. So you can always refer to this. You can bookmark it, and you can see it's so popular. I just noticed they actually made a poster of it because this is something a lot of people want to work with. You can get into background and basic terminology if you really want to nerd out like I do and learn about this stuff. Otherwise, if you just need a quick reference, we've got all these little illustrations, and it describes each of the flex properties in each of the different flex rules that you can write and what they do. And with illustrations of each and kind of what it should look like. So this is a really handy guide. And I know this, again, this can look really overwhelming, right, when you're looking at it. But you're only going to add like little pieces at a time. You're going to use one little thing at a time. We're going to use like 2 flex rules today, and you're going to get a nice looking layout. And the next time you build a site, you might use those 2 flex rules, and you might throw in flex direction here, right? And just see what that does. So you're going to just layer that on and on. And the reason, you know, us developers who do this all the time are good at this stuff is because we've done it 1,000 times and we've added those little things. You know, I built this site and I used these 2, and I built the next site and I tried some more, and it's a lot of fun. And you get to learn things like incrementally, right? There is one other site I want to show you, and it's as ridiculous as it sounds. But it's called Flexbox Froggy. You can see my autofill even fills it in because I've used this so many times. When I was first learning Flexbox, and even afterwards, when I knew it and I just needed to look something up, I use this site a lot. It's a little game. It looks like a little kid's game, and it kind of is, but it's awesome. What this does is it walks you through. It's like a little tutorial on how to use Flexbox. And you have your little frog here, and the whole goal is to get the little frog onto the lily pad. And then as you go along, you get frogs of different colors, and you have to get the different color ones onto the right lily pad. And what it does is you use your Flexbox properties to make that happen, right? So the first one, it kind of gives you like exactly what you need to write. Justify content flex end. And when I do that, hey, the frog jumps on the lily pad. I would highly recommend using this no matter who you are. I love this site. I'm almost 40 years old and I do this for a living, and it's just fantastic. It's a lot of fun. It teaches you a lot really quickly. And it gives you a chance to experiment a little bit. So let's go ahead and add that sidebar to our website. All right, so here, let's walk through what we're going to do, and then we'll go ahead and just do it. We're going to do this one together, all right? This is our coding section for this video, but I want to make sure that we stay together on this one. And then at the end, I'll give you a chance to kind of play around with it and try your own version of Flexbox, but do this with me. Pause the video as often as you need to catch up, but go ahead and do this with me. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new CSS declaration to our wrapper class. All right, remember we have a class of wrapper, literally. And we're going to say display flex. We're going to say, okay, this wrapper is a flex container. When we do that, we're going to see things don't look the way we want them to look. So we're going to end up dividing and wrapping our existing content into 2 sibling divs directly under the wrapper div. And you'll see what that looks like and that means. And actually, we're not even going to use divs. I'm going to use a different set of elements just to kind of show you a few more. So one of the divide and wrap ones that we're going to do, we're going to name content, and one we're going to name sidebar, and then we're going to add the CSS, and we're just going to copy and paste it right out of here. So let's get into it. Let's go over to our so the first thing it says is find our wrapper class. Let's find it. There's wrapper, and add display flex. So let's do that. Display flex, not flex. Flex. Now let's look over here and see what that did. Let's see if it gives us what we want. It does not at all. We knew that wasn't going to. I already told you that. But you can kind of see what happens, right? It took all of the children and it put them right up next to each other, which looks just awful. Because if we look at our HTML, our wrapper class is right here, and its children are all these individual items. So it's trying to line those all up and give them equal amounts of space, and there's just way too much content for it to even do that. So you end up with this horizontal scroll bar. Things are all missized and wonky. So we're going to take the next step that's on the slide, and we're going to divide and wrap. So I need to decide, what do I want to be my main content, and what do I want to be my sidebar? So you may have noticed that I have these little guys right here. If you're not using comments in your code, you really should start using it. I have to remind myself constantly to do this, but it's so helpful, because it's not only a little note to yourself, because you think you'll remember things and you won't. You'll come back 2 weeks later and you won't have any idea what is happening here, and you got to reread it. having little notes of like, hey, this is what this does, or this is what this is super helpful. And if you work with other people on code, it helps them get an idea of what you were thinking, right? So I went ahead and said, hey, this is the main content of my site, and then the stuff below this is the sidebar. So let's go ahead and wrap it. So I've got main content. We actually have an HTML tag called main that we can use. It works exactly the same way as a div. It's really no different in any way. But what it does is when I'm looking at the code, I see this main tag and I go, oh, this must be some sort of main content, right? So we're actually going to give it a class of content. And so we call it more semantically correct. It's something that indicates the purpose of this element. It's the main content, right? We have one for our sidebar as well. We have an HTML5 tag called aside. So it's makes it look like, you know, hey, aside, this stuff is set aside. It's literally to the side. It's a sidebar. So again, more semantic stuff to help us, you know, remind ourselves and other people what's going on here. So we'll give this a class of sidebar. And before we move on too much, I want to show you, because I don't think I showed you this during the HTML videos, but if I Google HTML5 elements, probably one of the better results would be this W3 schools. We talked about them before, but this is going to list a whole bunch of the elements that are available to us in HTML5 and kind of what they each do. And if you want just a kind of a straight up list, excuse me, let's see, the Mozilla.org websites, that's going to be the people who actually write the standards and keep things up to date. So this is going to be really helpful. Now this is a whole list of kind of all of the elements that are available to us in HTML. Some of these I forget that they even exist. Like, I have no idea what a bidirectional isolate element even is. You don't have to memorize all these. You learn the ones that you use, and you slowly add to your kind of vocabulary. Span I use all the time. None of these other ones I use at all. I don't even know what they do. But if I ever have need for them, I will, and I'll go back every so often and learn a few more. Just so that I'm like, oh, I should be using this thing over here because I didn't realize that was a thing. But these are good references to have here. So we've divided up our content. We've got our aside. We've got our main. Let's look at our site now. It's a lot better, isn't it? It's looking a lot more like what we want it to. Now I have a couple issues with what I'm seeing here. I don't like that things are right up on top of each other. But I also don't really like that they're like basically the same size, right? Because remember, the default is 0, 1, auto. So we're saying don't really grow, don't really shrink, take up, figure it out, calculate it. And so it's going to say it's going to try to divide it up evenly if it can. So we're going to take our, I'll flip over to that slide. We're going to take this CSS here, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste it, and we can look at what it is actually saying. We'll flip over here, go to our CSS, and I'll just drop it right at the bottom. All right, so we'll push our little magic format button, and it makes us all happy with the sparkles. But let's look at what it's saying. Flex, the 0, 1, they're both the same, so we can kind of ignore those for right now. But this 75%, remember that's our flex basis value. So it's saying, what is our kind of base width value that we want to set? We put content at 75% and sidebar at 25%. So that's going to give us different sizes here. So if I open up our page again, this is looking a lot better. This looks a lot more like sidebar and main content versus just 2 columns of content, right? That's what our flex does. Now, outside of the flex thing, again, we still have this stuff kind of right up against each other. So I might take something like, go over here and say, all right, I've got some room to spare on the content. So I'm just going to say padding right, let's say 60 pixels. Let's see what that looks like. Hey, that looks a lot better. See, now I just added some padding here. You could have used margin. I like to use padding for things like this because margin pushes things away from each other, and so there's a possibility this might pop to a different spot, especially if we have different flex properties set. But you just put a little space, and this is just, again, another example of how we can just tweak little things at a time and get to where we want to go with our site and get it looking exactly the way we want it to. And yeah, that's pretty exciting. So I think that's the last slide for us. Yep, so that's the last slide. So go ahead, and I want you to try that out on your site. It doesn't have to be, you did the whole sidebar main content thing. So maybe just pick an element, just make a div with a colored background, and then put a couple more, elements inside of it, and see if you can use flex on that main thing and see what it does, and play around with it and just break things. Because there's nothing that you can break so bad that it's not going to be pretty easy to fix. So try that out, and we will see you in the next video when we're talking about responsive layouts and how to make things kind of look good, all the way from a mobile phone up to a giant TV. All right, guys. All right, we'll see you later. Bye.